Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we're doing one of these rare episodes where someone actually reached out to me first. So, how about you introduce yourself and we'll just go from there?
Sure. Thank you very much for actually having me on your show. Um, yeah, so I switched to Linux 5 years ago. My name is Amadeus Paulussen. I am a music producer, and I think I worked like close to 30 years on macOS. And ever since I'm on Linux, I felt like driven to, of course, motivate other people to try it as well, and especially to motivate the developers to actually build Linux builds of their software. And yeah, I think maybe half a year ago or so, it started to get a little bit like more intense. And so I started to actually talk to tons of developers, and some of them agreed to make Linux build. I helped them debug and stuff. And I felt it would be the right time to reach out to you, and maybe make you aware of this stuff that I'm doing here, because it's still, I mean, it's really small. No, I think if I would count all the people that I know that make music with Linux, maybe 50 people or something like that. No? But I think that's basically why I reached out.
So, where do you think's the best place to start here? I think maybe like the kinds of tools that people are using, but I'm happy to go in any direction that you want to go here.
Sure. I mean, I think on Linux to make music, I think two of the biggest problems are audio interfaces and hardware in general, that the manufacturers just plain ignore Linux. There is no software to configure the stuff. And for instance, in pro audio, you have lots of special tools like, for instance, room calibration software that measures the speaker and stuff. And even though it would be relatively simple, and many of these tools actually are written with the help of Juice, with this framework, so it would be simple for them to make Linux build. Many vendors decide not to do it.
Assume
We
that's
can talk.
JUCE.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the Juice framework. And actually, I think most of the vendors, they have like old views about Linux. They are really scared of Linux. They think like, oh my God, these people will tear our support team apart. They have like 20 different Windows systems, window managers, desktop environments, and et cetera, et cetera. But the more I talk to the developers who actually made the step and made Linux builds, the more they said this is actually completely debunked. This is not true. Usually the Linux users help themselves as long as it's possible. And when they reach out, the bug reports are actually very good, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one reason why I think that it's not so easy to get into audio production on Linux, because the stuff that you might already have can eventually, maybe it's just not working on Linux. And then the other side is the music producers often are really addicted to plugins. Like you have your digital audio workstation, and then you have tons of plugins that you can install and use. And it's also like a really crowded market. I think there's a lot of money to make, because there's so many companies that offer plugins. And also many of them, of course, don't support Linux. And when I started with Linux 5 years ago, this was also, on one side, it was also a blessing for me, because I really felt addicted to this stuff. Like I felt like whatever comes out, I have to get it, I have to try it. And after a while, I even made a little spreadsheet for myself that I could use to filter through all the stuff, because I forgot about what all I have. No? And so in the beginning on Linux, I felt like, oh my God, good, I don't have so many plugins. But then, of course, the urge came back, and then there's really stuff that you need in order to do some work, and it was not available. So I started to annoy all kinds of vendors to support Linux. And out of some of these connections, I would even call it like little friendships, where I helped them to basically make it happen that they could support Linux, because most of them they don't have the time to test it even, then they are really happy if there's someone who helps them to test it. And that's actually my mission right now. I am on this mission to contact vendors, convince them that Linux is actually amazing nowadays to make music, and then the other thing is that I try to, how to say, like to motivate the community to also do their part. And that's still something that I'm not so sure about, because I think there's lots of people who use Linux for music making, but maybe I cannot reach them sometimes, because what I sometimes did is I made, in an official forum, basically I said, hey, all you Linux musicians, please voice your desire to have this and that on Linux. And then sometimes participation was very low. But in other cases, participation was very high. So that's also still something I try to figure out how it works.
It's trying to find like where they actually are.
Exactly. And also I am not visible, I have maybe, I don't know, 100 followers here, 50 followers there. And I think this whole thing needs to be a little bit better, how do you say, represented. And also I am, when I switched to Linux, it was a special phase in my life. I also basically destroyed all my social media accounts. I only kept like Reddit, because I use it often to just look up things or discuss things. And I kept Instagram because that was the most easiest way to connect to people. And other than that, I'm not present. I have no accounts, I'm not on Facebook and not on X. And so it's kind of difficult. But that's what I want to do, actually. I want to reach more people so that they maybe on one end want to try Linux for music making, and on the other end to motivate the developers to actually to tick the box so that they make Linux builds.
I think there's right now a lot of push for, people in the gaming space, people in general computing, all of this stuff to swap to Linux. But I don't really hear much from the music production side. And maybe, I know you were saying you were using Mac before. Maybe you have some more opinions on this. Why is it that people tend to gravitate, from what I can see, towards the Mac side? Like, what is being offered there that people seem to want?
Well, I don't know, to be honest. I think Mac always gives the impression that it's going to be simple. You buy the MacBook, the operation system is already on there. Everything is more or less done for you. Nowadays, you have like broad support, like all the tools that you could want, they probably run on Mac. And I think there is this, even though I think it's probably not true, but I think many people have this conception that Mac OS is the industry standard. Like if you have a Mac and you go to a studio, you will have no problems. That's always also one of the questions I ask the Linux musicians. Do you encounter any issues because of you maybe running into a studio with your Linux computer? And all of them say no issues at all, But I think that's probably the reason, yeah.
No, I can definitely understand that. Especially if you're not someone who wants to deal with a computer, you use a computer as a tool rather than you're interested in the computer itself, right? Like there's this expectation on Linux that you generally have some interest in, customizing the system, customizing your desktop, things like this. But if your entire goal is to use it like an appliance, I can certainly see why you'd want to go with the thing that everyone kind of just says works, so you don't really have to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also something, I recently wrote a guide how to start with music production on Linux, and I realized that I am now knee deep into this venture. And for me, it seems very simple. You can have that Mac-like experience with Linux, no problem. But in the beginning, when you start to learn about Linux, like the question is always what distro, what desktop environment, and what is Hyperland? Should I try Hyperland and stuff? Like, I think in the beginning it can just be very overwhelming. And I hear a lot people say that the Linux adoption would become bigger if actually more devices would ship with Linux. And I agree that this whole first little phase where you have to read a little bit and learn a little bit about Linux before you can actually start is, I think, for many people already overwhelming enough that they don't try it.
So you mentioned earlier plugins and how people kind of rely on these plugins. I don't know anything about music production at all. So why is there such a desire to have all of these plugins available?
So I think there are certain things like, like for instance, audio restoration, where you need certain like tools that are really highly developed and specialized on certain tasks.
Mm,
For instance, where you can remove artifacts from audio or denoise audio, etc., etc. So there's all these things like that are really specialized that you don't have as a standard toolkit in your DAW.
mhm,
But then I think the much larger the much larger part of this is just inspiration.
mm,
Like many of the tools that are super successful, like plugins, it's basically just a nice shell, a nice workflow to do something that you could actually do without the plugin, if you're
mm,
very honest. So, and that's also what I did in the beginning when I switched to Linux. I just said, okay, now let's just use the things that come out of the box. And I actually seldomly came into a situation where I realized, like, ah, shit, now I don't have that on Linux. I cannot do it. But it's these two things. And I think, yeah, there are still certain things that are really missing on Linux.
mm,
Like in this like post-production audio restoration editing professional tool stuff.
mm,
But then again, I mean, there's so many also open source stuff. There's, for instance, the Linux Studio project, where you have a ton of plugins that are really highly developed. And of course, it's like so often no, in Linux and open source that you have to be willing to go that route. Like, for instance, I also do a lot of graphic design and
mm,
web development and stuff. And there are on Mac, again, there are apps that are like so polished that when you come to an open source alternative, like let's take, for instance, Adobe Illustrator, and then you come to Inkscape. In the
mm,
beginning, you think like, oh man, everything is so cumbersome. Before this took 2 clicks, now it's like 5 clicks. But after a while, you really fall in love with these tools and you
mm,
learn
mm,
to value them. And then on top, that was something that was really important for me, this experience. Like I had a company in Switzerland for 25 years where we did web development. So we
mm,
used a lot of open source stuff, and we were used to, report bugs,
mhm,
get like are in a conversation with the developers and then get the fix. And for instance, on Mac OS, I can tell you like maybe 10 years, there were some really annoying bugs,
mm,
and you could report them over and over. You would not get any feedback. You would not know what's going on. It was really frustrating.
mhm, mhm,
And when I started to use Linux and I started to report bugs, and then all of a sudden I felt like, oh my God, that's so amazing. Now I talk to the people who are actually making the software,
mhm,
and they ask me questions and I help to fix it. And even maybe I'm not a developer, but maybe I make some nice graphics and commit them to the project, and then they're eventually even used. It's almost like growing your own tomatoes. It's just
mhm,
an
mhm,
experience you have to, I don't know, you have to go through in order to understand it. Yeah, it's
mm,
really
mm, mm.
beautiful.
So if somebody wants to get involved in doing audio production on Linux, I know you've got this guide and we can kind of go through a bit of it here, but like what does someone need to understand about what they're doing? There's the obvious things that is just naturally the case with Linux, like, oh, the distribution you're using, you need to have hardware that is compatible with Linux, but the audio specific stuff, like, what do you need to sort of consider?
So I that's also something I am like I have an opinion on it, but I also respect other people's opinions.
Mm,
Like so many people that are longer in Linux, they for instance they swear by the power of Jack, for instance,
mm,
the
mm,
this and they know how to set it up, and they have tons of like I don't know, use cases that they can really make it a good thing. But for me in the beginning, when I started with Linux, I felt pretty overwhelmed by these things. Like, why do I have to configure an audio server first before I can actually use my programs?
mm,
And then Pipewire came along, and I am anyways addicted to adopting new stuff. That's why I understand, like in the Linux world, there's many things like Wayland,
mm,
Flatpak, all these things that are controversial. And I am just a person who I think this makes sense. I believe in it. And then I even go the painful way, even if I know, like, oh my God, OBS is like just a pain with Wayland or whatever.
mhm,
I
mhm,
go that route. But in general, like and that's my suggestion to people would be take a modern distribution, go with Pipewire, don't install Jack. I would never advise anyone to use something like Ubuntu Studio, for instance, that
mhm.
comes with a ton of apps, because I think you actually don't need all these apps in the beginning. And I think it's better if you go step by step. So
So rather than
that's why.
taking something that has everything there for you, you'd much rather people bring things in as they need them, so they sort of understand why they're there.
Exactly. Look, it's like if I would tell you, Brody, you want to start learning music, here's my studio, go.
Mm-hmm.
You would say, oh my God, there's so much stuff to learn. But if
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you, look, here you have a standalone unit and you can make some sounds with it and record it, then you can learn step by step. That's why I think if you start with Linux, you obviously have to choose a DAW. And there's like, for me, the reason why I in the beginning even thought about Linux is because Bitwig Studio was available for Linux, and that's actually it's like a, how do you say, it's like a Lego Technic kit in a way, a science toolkit, right? You can connect everything to everything, and it's like very, very fun for me to use. But other people might want to use something else like Reaper or Studio One. And when you have chosen this, the only thing, in my opinion, that you need is a modern distribution with Pipewire, and you're good to go. If you then need more performance, then you need to tweak the real-time aspects a little bit, but that's really only a couple of steps. I think personally, you don't need much more to start. And actually, I think it's best if you don't have much more to start and just go step by step, right?
Yeah, real-time audio is something that I should probably properly configure on my system, because it is kind of relevant for what I'm doing with, the live streaming and the video capture stuff. I've had a number of audio capture issues over my time. And I'm pretty sure I know why they're there. And I'm pretty sure doing this would probably fix them as well. I started capturing my mic through jack in Pipewire, so the Pipewire jack stuff, and the problems have mostly gone away, but that does kind of limit me in certain ways, and it doesn't help with other situations. So I probably should go through and make sure everything is sort of configured for nice low latency audio.
Yeah, you can use this little app, Millisecond. That's actually really helpful because it scans your system and basically tells you what you need to change. And then it always links to the Linux Musicians Wiki, I think, or linuxaudio.org wiki. And so I did most of these things with the Arch Wiki. And the Arch Wiki is also really helpful if you're on an Arch distribution to do that stuff. And actually, it's really not that much. You don't even need a real-time kernel. Actually, it's just a few settings that you need to adjust, and then you already have a much better performance.
So, when it comes to the hardware you're picking, what do you need to consider on that side? Because I don't want to turn my camera because I'll never get it back to where I have it. I have something massively overkill for what I'm doing. I have a Yamaha MG10XU here, so I can plug a bunch of junk into it. But I bought this like 7 years ago at this point. So if somebody doesn't have something, or they do have something and they want to know if it does work, what do they need to consider there?
So maybe I want to tell you something a little bit, like as a preface to this, basically, because I also wasn't aware of this. Nowadays, if I tell you, if someone asks me what audio interface will work with Linux, I say just make sure it also works with iOS or iPad OS, and then it also works with Linux. And that was actually one of the biggest drivers in the beginning to make stuff work on Linux, because of Apple's stubbornness and closedness. They forced people to make stuff that is USB class compliant. And if something is USB class compliant, it's most likely also going to work on Linux. But that's only one part of it. I think there's tons of interfaces that work because they are class compliant, but then they still don't come with software. So you cannot configure the routing and stuff. What I did, and it's kind of like, it feels like sometimes I ask myself, why do people even ask themselves what to take? But then it's also a little bit unfair, because what I did, I chose an interface that can be configured entirely on the hardware. That's why I don't use any software at all. And that's also, sometimes I think like maybe I am cheating a little bit with my claim that Linux music production is amazing, because I think I did my homework in that sense, that I chose stuff that is really simple and makes no problems. So I have an RME Fireface, and that's a multi-channel interface. With class compliance, you also have some limitations, like you can only have 24 inputs, I think, and the interface would support more. but it's not a problem for me. It might be a problem for others though, right? So yeah, I think the hardware is still difficult. Focusrite, I know there is like an open source driver. There's a FOSS initiative actually, and they have also the backing of Focusrite. Like Focusrite, I think, provides all the units to test. So if you get a Focusrite interface, then you even have a nice software router where you can
yeah, this is
route all
done
the
as
signals.
of about 2 years ago, according to this Reddit post.
Yeah, yeah. So there's the really simple stuff that doesn't need software, right? And then the complicated things, I think RME is a good option because it's really high end and you can configure everything on the unit. But then again, like some people say, I will never touch the unit. It's crazy, like with shift and menus. And for me, it's okay because I wanted to use Linux. I wanted to do that. And then I just, took this as a given. I have to go this path, But yeah, there are a couple of options now, and there are even some that have nice software.
Yeah, I can understand the software being an issue as well. Like, I'm looking at this from like the gaming side, and it has all of the same problems where you buy some fancy keyboard or some fancy mouse, and it's gonna work. You're gonna be able to plug in the keyboard, plug in the mouse, and it works. But then it might have a bunch of macro keys, it might have a bunch of light configuration stuff, and all of that is done with some software that is just not available on Linux. And sometimes, like, I buy Logitech stuff because there is good support on Linux, but there's so many other things out there where there's probably nothing available, and you just can't really do as much as you want to do with it. Great example of this as well is my Elgato Stream Deck. This is my macro pad. And I'm very happy that as of a couple of years ago, there is an open source driver for this that lets you do basically everything you want to do. But for a long time, it was just an expensive paperweight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's in general a problem I think that you have on Linux that you have to accept for the time being. I think it will improve, of course, in all kinds of areas, but you have to check if the stuff really works on Linux, right? And many, like I also have a Stream Deck, for instance, and I even had to choose out of 3 different options, open source options to use it. And it was actually amazing. I was really happy that this is the case. But yeah, I think this is something. I mean, I switched to Linux also out of idealism, right? I just realized that Apple develops into a mega corporation that I don't really vibe with anymore. And then I realized just like sometimes things take a while. No? And now I think like, why did I stay so long on macOS? But so I wanted to do something good, and this could be painful, and for me that was no problem. So if you don't want, I think if you don't are willing to at least go some rocky paths, then maybe you have to wait a year longer or so. Yeah.
So when we're looking at plugins, my understanding is there's multiple different plugin frameworks. Is that what they are? Plugin APIs?
Yeah, so I mean, there's plugin standards on one side, like there's LV2, for instance, which would be the native Linux plugin format. Then there is Steinberg's VST, VST2, and VST3 actually. They also both run on Linux. And then there is Clap that also runs on Linux. Clap is relatively new, it's also an open source framework. And so basically these are the standards, right? And then you have, as a developer, you have the option to, of course, you can either program everything yourself, or you can use a framework like Juice. And there's a number of these frameworks now that you can use to plugin development. And I think Juice, I have no numbers, but I think Juice is probably the most widely used one. And but yeah, again, if you want to start to write Linux plugins, then you have tons of options. But if you already have your plugins, let's say for macOS and Windows, then there might be situations where it's not so easy for you to port them to Linux. But in most cases, it's actually really only a decision to check some boxes to also have Linux builds made. And then, of course, you have to test them and stuff. Yeah.
And as of recording this, about 2 weeks ago, VST3 also went open source under an MIT license, which is very cool to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Many people hope that this will allow the developers to make more easily to make more Linux builds. And there's also people who think this is a response actually to the rise of clap. I am not sure. I think what can be problematic is if before it was like proprietary and open source, so it was hard for you to make a only open source plugin basically. But now I think it should be easier, and who knows, maybe this will help many developers to support Linux easier or to support open source easier. I don't know, but I think most of the people don't really like VST. VST3 or VST2, and they're actually happy if something like clap gets more successful. But I think it's great nonetheless.
Yeah, you mentioned clap having some effect here, and I opened up a Reddit post, and literally the first top comment is, if all clap managed to achieve was this, then it's been worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think this has a big effect.
So my understanding is there's also a way to run plugins that are not natively available on Linux.
Absolutely. I mean, like in gaming, I think from gaming, probably many people also know Bottles. And where you just, I mean, in the beginning, I used Bottles to run some of the plugin managers that were only available on macOS or Windows, actually only to be able to sell licenses to people that bought my old licenses. So I installed these little programs, these helpers, and could use them on Linux. But some of them would not work. And I think it's pretty much also what sums up the situation with the plugins. Like if you're willing to tweak a little bit and try a little bit, then you can make a lot of these plugins work. Some of them also work really easily. Most of the people use YaBridge, I think, which is based on Wine. And yeah, there's even people who believe that we need something like a Proton for plugins, something that is really highly polished and like basically eats all of the plugins and makes them available on Linux. I am not sure. I think we are almost too deep inside with native plugin support that something like this will be necessary in the future. But still, yeah, it's already possible. I see people who use almost all their Windows plugins on Linux. And there are some things that, when they get updated, then they break. And that's also something that, on macOS and Windows, most of the plugin companies, they come with they have their installer applications. And I think, I don't know, maybe you can imagine that this stuff is often like not really high end and a little bit of a patchwork.
Right.
And I'm super happy that I don't have to deal with this on Linux so far. And that's also the reason, I guess, why some of them do not work with Wine, Bottles, or YaBridge or whatever. Yeah.
So there's definitely stuff you have to worry about, but it's not an insurmountable task to learn how to do all of this stuff on Linux.
No, I think, I think something that might be problematic is many musicians are used to work with, like, for instance, Pro Tools, which is also something that is considered like an industry standard. And they are used to, like, if someone sends them a project and they don't have the plugin, that they can just go ahead, buy the plugin, and then work with that session. And those are things that you might run into a wall when you're on Linux. But if you're like me, who mostly does music for themselves, then you can make decisions and you can say, that's okay if I don't have this. And yeah, but you can work around it, I think, if you're more independently working. But if you're collaborating with a lot of people, then I think it can be problematic in certain situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, if it's the whole thing with, it's the same thing in like graphic production, right? If your entire team makes use of Photoshop and there's one person who's like trying to do things on Linux, like, this is just not going to happen. Like, your entire workflow is tied to that, and trying to pass things around through different systems is gonna, like, you might be able to do it, but you're probably going to cause something to break.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to be the annoying guy who works with Linux. But yeah, I think in audio, like, for instance, nowadays I work with many people that I send projects back and forth. And I just consciously try to not use anything that they might not have. Or, in audio, it's also like most of the stuff is real time, but then you can also render it so that the people don't need to have the plugins. And I never have problems, even if people send me stuff. Usually I just make them aware that if they use something really fancy, that they should render it so that I have it. And like that, it's no problem for me. But again, you have to think about more things than if you would be on Mac or Windows. So.
Okay, so let's talk about the plugin initiative. I guess, when did that start?
Actually, not long ago. I think it's maybe a year old now.
Mhm.
I had this idea for quite a while, and I think I'm. How would you call that? I think I believe in things that are not realistic. I am very optimistic oftentimes,
Uh-huh.
and so when I saw that there's actually a bunch of amazing plugin developers already supporting Linux, like Yuhi or Tal audio software and stuff like that, I felt they could have maybe an interest to also motivate other developers and help them with their problems and etc. So that initially was the idea. My idea was to create some sort of a hub where knowledge could be gathered and then shared with other developers. And I think this happens to some extent, that these developers help each other. But then again, most of them still don't see Linux as a priority. For many of them, it's really no effort. They just make the builds and they have some sort of a disclaimer on their website that there is limited support for Linux, or that it's like a permanent beta version or whatever. And so they kind of guard themselves and to not have too big of an obligation. But that was the initial idea. And then it turned into something a little different. So I reached out on Mastodon to other Linux audio musicians and asked them if they would help me to come up with an FAQ about the topic. And it turned out that I also did not know enough about all of this stuff. And actually, the great thing on Mastodon was that many what would be the word, illustrious developers from the open source world that really make amazing stuff in the audio field actually reached out and helped me to make this FAQ. And then I started to make a logo and a little website. And I always, because I always was already in contact with the developers, I asked them if they would be willing to do interviews. So we started to do interviews, and now it's almost like it's a big chunk of my day to work on this project. And I am still not sure if it's ideal, because initially I wanted to actually make it much more open, that people can easier help also to work on the project, but I still haven't figured out how to do this. Even on the website, I'm not. I only have knowledge in the front end, basically. So some of the stuff is a bit patchy behind the scenes. And I actually thought in the beginning that I could establish this as an open source project and everyone can help, everyone can contribute. But so far, it's mostly me who is trying to do my best to get more developers on board. And also I also have a section where I portray artists. So also get this a little bit more in the spotlight. But now, we talked already about it. Like,
Did we have a disconnect? Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? Oh?
are we back?
I think we're back.
Good. Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, now I'm actually the initiative is called Linux Audio Plugin Development, right? But I realize it probably would be better if it would be just Linux Audio Development, because that would also include the whole hardware side of things. Now I'm really focusing on the plugins, and I try to portray the musicians. But I kind of I'm thinking about to maybe modify it a little, make it a little more open, and also include the hardware topic, because I also realize this is something that people really stumble over in the beginning. They're not like me, who think, oh, I found something perfect. They also want to have like a wide range of available options to choose from, right?
Well, especially if they already have some sort of workflow already. Like, it's one thing if you're starting from scratch and you're starting on Linux, but if you already have some workflow already, then you kind of want everything you already have to be in a working state.
Absolutely, and that's also funny because, and I'm not sure if I am like if I can relate from myself to other people, but for me it was also like this in the beginning when I switched from Mac OS. I tried to find a replacement for every little tool I used on Mac, and I found something in most cases, but most of these things kind of faded out after a while. So now, like after Manjaro, after this time with Manjaro, I reinstalled my machine like from scratch with Arch Linux, and I basically did not install any of these tools anymore. It's very naked now. I don't need all of these things anymore. I realized like this is maybe nice to have, but I don't need it. And I'm not sure if the journey could be similar for other people. I don't know, because I think also when you are in this world, in this Mac ecosystem or Windows ecosystem where it's just flooded with options, you tend to do a lot of things that are actually not necessary.
Right,
And
right. It's like you have
yeah.
all of these things available, so you might as well use them.
Yeah, in a way, right? Yeah, and I also noticed like when you have so many tools at hand, and that's also my standpoint with the audio video Linux distributions that come packed with tons of apps. I think you have so many tools, and you know all of them only a little bit, but none of them like in their entirety. So yeah, nowadays I feel more like, even I feel like I am working for an initiative that I actually don't believe in, because I believe in you don't need so many plugins. But yeah.
So, what sort of success has the initiative had so far?
I have this list on the website that is like oh sorry, I have this list on the website that is like a Linux support request tracking. And there you basically see that I think we had 5 successes so far, like where some vendors basically, I reached out to them and they said, hey, you reached out at the right time. This is actually amazing. Let's do this, And most of them, they actually come with a whole bunch of tools. So when they started to develop their plugins also for Linux, that meant like 13 new plugins or 16 new plugins, or in some cases even more. But if you look at the list in its entirety, there's also quite a few who right away rejected Linux. Most of them basically say, if there was a real demand, then we would look into it, and with that they close the case. And some of them, they even say like, I love Linux, I even use Linux for developing the plugins, and yeah, let's do this. And so with these we have had more success, and it's also it's not just me, right? There's many people who reach out to the developers and ask them for Linux support, and probably in some cases it was really just a question of timing, and then they felt like, okay, come on, let's do this.
Right.
Many of them, are still, you sometimes even get the impression that an AI answered, because it's like very generic, like, oh wow, that's a really interesting request, and I will pass it to the developers and stuff like that. And with many of them, you're really hanging in the air. You have no idea what their stance actually is. And then there's also quite a few actually, who use a copyright protection system called iLok. I'm not sure if you heard about it.
Yeah, I was reading through the FAQ.
Yeah.
So
And for these, it's just end of the line, right? As long as they use iLok, they cannot support Linux. And so a bunch of them actually, at least they say they would like to support Linux, but they just can't, because they are right now like invested in this copy protection mechanism. Yeah.
right, okay. So it's basically just like a DRM system.
Yeah. And it started off actually in the beginning, and I used it in the beginning. It started off as a dongle, right? You had a USB dongle in the beginning. I think it was even a PS2 dongle. And then you had your plugins, and it's actually a nightmare, this system. I don't know anyone who likes it. I think also the developers, if they are honest, they don't like it, but it seems to be relatively brutal and a good protection. But I can only tell you this, like if you have to switch your hard disk, for instance, and you had no chance to unregister your plugins, then they are basically screwed, because they are registered to this old hardware ID, and you have to contact support. And in some cases, they ask you for money to go through the process. Like, it's really a nightmare. So yeah, I'm happy to not have this.
Your camera is out of focus, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
better now?
no.
No. Actually, I don't know what I can do. It's this all automatic Logitech stuff.
Oh, maybe put you. Sometimes putting your hand in front of the camera and then maybe, yeah, that worked. Magic.
Great. Good, good.
I had no idea about this iLok system. I read the FAQ. I didn't actually look properly into it. I didn't realize it was that crazy. So
Yeah,
like, it's actually hardware locking the plug. That's okay. Right.
and there's some people that use it as an advantage, because what you can do, like for instance, if you have a bunch of computers and you run around between those computers, you can basically just bring your key and you switch it to whatever computer you switch it, you can use all your plugins.
Okay.
But again,
Okay.
I think, yeah, it and they even think it's actually like something that is nice. I don't know. I think it's just dangerous, right? I had many situations with iLok in the past where I really had like 2 or 3 days I could not work because I was figuring out how to fix this, because I had with Apple, it's always like that. You go to the Apple store and they tell you, oh, motherboard needs, I think they call it logic board needs to be replaced, right? And then all your plugin licenses are basically locked. Later on, they introduced something that is called iLok Cloud, where you have the stuff in a cloud.
Right.
But that's also something very weird. You some of the plugins you buy, they do not accept the cloud. Some of them only work with the key, and it's just like a whole mess. It's
So that's sort of like, they introduced that, but there's not been a full adoption of it yet. So you kind of have this mix and match of what does and doesn't support it. So it's just a big mess, basically, is the best way to put it.
I mean, I don't want to offend anyone who likes it, but I really don't like it. And anyone I've ever asked about it, they roll their eyes and right away they really hate it. So I don't know. Maybe there's people who really like it. I don't know.
No, I understand. I don't like that there's going to be a system like this, but I understand that if a system like this exists, being able to just plug in a device and it just transfers the licenses over like that, I understand why that would be convenient. I get that.
Yeah.
I just don't like the existence of the system to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, plugin copy protection and in general software copy protection, I think is a little bit an issue, because let's say the company shuts down and then the challenge response server doesn't work anymore, and you basically bought software that you cannot authenticate anymore. So I think if it's iLok or anything else, it's problematic anyway. So you can just, but then again, also software doesn't get that old nowadays. So after a while, it's obsolete anyway. So I don't know. Yeah.
So besides iLok, have any of the developers had issues with like wanting to support it? Because obviously they might not want to support it because there's just not enough people to monetarily justify it. That, sure, whatever. But have you been told any technical reasons why they might not want to do so?
Yes. Many people say, like, for instance, they use Juice, but they wrote some custom-made libraries that basically their plugins heavily depend on, and they are not platform agnostic. So they are basically locked for macOS or Windows. And if they would like to support Linux, they would have to substantially invest time to rewrite those libraries and stuff. So I had that maybe 5 or 6 times that people say, we actually cannot do it because it's too much work for us.
Okay, that makes sense. And that sort of just comes down to, they would do it if there was enough justification, if there was enough people in that space, if there was enough money to make it viable. They would be more than happy to make it platform agnostic. But until that is the case, then I get it.
Absolutely. And also what I often hear is that we have no one in the team who has any idea about Linux. I hear that really often, and that's actually very sad, because then I usually offer them, in my utopian way of looking at things, I could be that person for free. But they usually don't want that risk, and they just, they don't do it.
Yeah. No, I get that. That's just a problem that's going to happen, right? Like, if you don't have the technical expertise to do it, and then you got to hire someone to bring it on, it's yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. But something else that is actually interesting that I learned also through this initiative is, like with servers, anyone I think who has a little idea of computers knows that Linux is a big thing, right? Linux and open source is a big thing. And actually in my, like in this position that I'm in, I'm asking people to support Linux where there's only a very small market and people believe it's really super niche, It's actually not true, because most of the hardware stuff for music actually runs Linux. And there are some people who specialize in this. I think Elk Audio, if I remember, they make an operating system that is entirely intended to be used on, like, how do you say, like low performance efficient hardware to actually power hardware devices that make music stuff. And then there's even crazier things. Like there is, I think, probably one of the most widely adopted DAWs, Ableton's Live. And they have a standalone unit that runs Live and it's actually running on Linux. So they have Live as Linux version, but they choose to not release it to the public. They choose to not support the platform, even though they have it actually.
That kind of makes sense. So there's some use of it for the actual devices. Like, it's an embedded device. That, like, makes perfect sense why that would be the case. But
yeah,
it's, again, like, it's just like a lot of things. You have Linux sort of, every single company that might say we don't want to support Linux, like 99% chance they're using Linux somewhere in their development stack, whether it be their web server, their build server. Like, Linux is involved somewhere. It's just they don't want to bring it into, like, the main thing they're providing.
Yeah, I think it's in general also the problem that many open source projects have, right? Like people like to take it. And if the license allows it, they even basically white label it and use it for something else. But if someone asks for something in return, then it's too complicated for them. They cannot be bothered. So I actually had quite a few conversations with developers that said, actually, how much I benefited from Linux. Okay, let's do this. Let's make Linux builds, even if there's only 5 users who use it, just out of idealism. And I think that's the right way to look at it. But of course, I cannot decide for others. Everyone has to decide for themselves.
Sure, and it also would depend on the complexity of the plugin. I'm sure the simpler ones, that might take, I don't know, a week or so of work to get running on Linux are probably much easier to justify than something where it's going to take quite a lot of effort for, like, the idealism sort of side of things. If it's, we just want to support it because it sounds cool to support, when it's easier to do so, like, it's easier to sort of justify that.
Sure, absolutely. And then also, I think on macOS and Windows, there are some things that I'm not even sure if they are technically so easily to implement on Linux. Like, for instance, there's a bunch of plugins that do inter-plugin communication. Basically, you have different channels in your track and you have different instances of the plugin and they can talk to each other. And I'm not even sure how they do that on Windows and macOS. Certainly, me being stupid and using my DAW as a flat pack makes this impossible from the get-go. But so I think there's also some plugins that use, some patchy, hacky technology that might need to be reinvented for Linux in order to make it happen. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, this goes back to it just not being platform agnostic. I would hope they're doing sensible networky things with it that are fairly portable, but I think we've all heard cases, and if you've ever looked at things like the leaked Windows XP source code, I think everyone kind of knows that when nobody is going to be seeing the code, people will do some things that probably are not the best of ideas.
Yeah. I think that can be assumed. Yeah. I even had, like with my company where we made web applications with open source technologies, I was always like frustrated if something was not a nice solution, right? And I said to the customer, it works, but actually for us it's frustrating because it's more like a workaround than actually a real solution. But there was not enough budget or whatever, not enough time. And many of the owners of other companies always told me, why do you worry? It works, right? And you got the money for it. It's okay. But I think as long as you really care for, also like my guys who were working on this stuff, they were frustrated because they felt like we delivered actually crap. It's kind of working, but it was not something that we're proud of. And I think many developers, especially if you go back to these installers and stuff like that, I don't know, it's really just like crap in the end. So it kind of works, but it's frustrating. Yeah, probably also to work on it. I don't know.
Mhm. So, when you were first starting to get interested in Linux, what was the state of things in the audio space?
Uh, Hard to say. I think it was not so bad. There were a couple of issues with, where like you had to restart the computer if you had no idea about pipe wires, underminings and how they work. Like you were making music, all of a sudden, back, audio was gone. And then you restarted and it would work for another couple of hours, stuff like that. In general, I think it was already very good, but there were like some things that you made. And I have to be honest, I mean, there's bugs and crashes and stuff also on Mac, on Windows. So it's not that this was something super special, but it was a bit more than I was used to, like little things like that. And also sometimes, like when you open different projects, sometimes the sample frequency changes, like from 44.1 to 48 or something like that. And that would maybe in some instances create like digital burst sounds, like really crazy sounds that could also technically kill your speakers if you would listen too loud and stuff like that. But this is really all gone for me. I don't have any issues like that anymore. What I sometimes still have, that I don't really understand if it's like Wayland connected or whatever, but what I sometimes have is that, for instance, drag and drop between two apps. When you have, for instance, a sample browser app where you go through your audio library and you want to drag it into the DAW, this may be working for 2 hours and then all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And in X11, you could just restart the session, but with Wayland, you have to log out, log in. And so stuff like that, sometimes I have to be honest, there's little things like that that still sometimes happen. And I don't really understand them in some cases.
That's not just a your system thing. I do notice the same as well. Like I'll be going through, working on some video stuff. I try to drag a thumbnail into my browser and it just doesn't work. Who knows why? There's probably some log somewhere that's indicating an error, but I don't know what log it is or where it would be. So a lot of times I kind of just restart and it works fine then.
Yeah. It's also interesting, like for instance, I was even dreaming of a screensaver like in the old days that actually just shows my journal CTL because I like to look at it and see what's going on. But it's actually interesting for someone who is not that knowledgeable like myself, that it's often not that easy to actually find log files that really help you in a certain way. Like, of course, like if they properly log to journal CTL, then it's nice. But in many cases, something behaves weird and you see nothing in no log. You don't know why, you know?
Yeah, like maybe they do have a log file, but it's their own custom log file, and they don't really indicate where it is. So if you want to find it, then you got to do some like deep dive on the internet. Like, okay, where does this application store the log file? Assuming somebody's ever cared to work that out, and maybe you'll find some documentation on it. There's pain points here and there, but I do like the fact that you can generally assume that there's going to be something somewhere. It might just not be obvious. Whereas on Windows, who knows? Maybe they're doing something, maybe they're not. There's just like on Windows and on macOS to some extent, there's less of an assumption that the user is going to want to dig into that lower level stuff. So oftentimes it's not as obvious where to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Like for instance, I had this issue where I made a script to actually when I launch OBS to connect my microphone and everything already, and I don't know why it seems to be correct, and it works, but only for like half an hour, and then the microphone disconnects. As to when I would just use Helvum and do the connection manually, it would be super reliable. And that's also in some of these, like when you try to do something that is like makes your life easier, I most of the times don't do these things anymore because of little annoyances like that. And then later I learned that actually what I did is I rewrote basically the ID of the device while doing it, and that's the wrong way to do it. And so, yeah, like if you want to do something smart, then you sometimes really have to dig deep and learn a lot in order to really make it happen. And in other instances, you just create new problems that you didn't have before.
Mm-mm. So earlier you mentioned how when you first swapped over, you were trying to replace a lot of those things you had on macOS. So where were you when you first swapped to Linux? Like, what were you using, and what are those things that maybe you just thought, okay, I don't actually need them anymore?
Yeah. So like I maybe just to begin with, I started to use Linux for maybe over a year just on a USB stick. I
Mm.
would put it in my MacBook, and when I was in the studio, I would put it in the Mac Pro and just boot from the stick. And that for me was already like so amazing. I used the same stick on two different computers, and just I basically experimented with Linux. And then like after a while I said, okay, let's do it just like cold plunge, just use Linux and don't use Mac anymore.
Mhm.
And so on Mac, for instance, I had an app that would make everything slightly blurry that is not in focus. So the app in the front would be basically sharp and nice, and the rest would be a little bit like sepia and a little bit blurry. So I in the beginning I had an odyssey of GNOME shell extensions that I tested to kind of replicate this, and in a like half baked I could replace this. And also on Mac, something that I really liked was I actually don't even know what the name was, but I remember that the extension I found as a replacement was Qtile, where I had tons of keyboard shortcuts set up to take like 3 windows and put them tuck, tuck, tuck next to each other. Something that a tiling window manager would do automatically, I did manually. And so these things I tried to replicate. Then I also had like a tool, I only remember the name on Linux, input remapper. On Mac OS, I don't remember the name anymore. That's really crazy. I forgot most of my Mac time, actually. But input remapper I used because I had a custom mechanical keyboard that had basically the same function keys on the left and on the right side, so that I could use both fingers, both hands to press shortcuts. And this I used in the beginning as well. And now all of these things I don't use anymore. It's like, I don't know, I could still use them. There are replacements, but I decided to just exercise not to use them anymore. And now I'm super happy, actually.
Mhm. You just kind of got used to you got too used to them having them on macOS, and then you slowly sort of brought yourself more back to like a simpler kind of experience, I guess.
I think also nowadays, I'm not sure if that is unfair to say, but I think like this mission center stuff in macOS in many ways doesn't really make sense to me
Mm.
anymore. And it was like the same back then. So I kind of had to have a bunch of tools that would allow me to do things that I needed, like put windows in certain places. Like, I don't know if you ever or if you remember how you had to hold the alt key while you press the plus icon to actually maximize the windows, in Mac
Mm,
OS.
mm,
If
mm,
you would just press it, it would become a full screen window. And if you press it again, it would just be small again. And so there were a bunch of things like in the standard Mac window management thing that I didn't like. And so I found lots of little tools that made this more accessible. And I just realized, when I came to Linux, in the beginning, I looked at KDE and GNOME, and then I felt like, okay, GNOME is more like Mac. I feel more comfortable using this. And after a while, I really started to dig this workflow with the overview and the workspaces. And so I kind of didn't need all this extra stuff anymore. I think it was more that. I think nowadays, when I am on the MacBook of my wife, I click like Command Space, and then I start to type something, and then sometimes I click an icon in the dock, but it would not bring the app to the front. And I think it makes totally no sense, and
uh-huh.
it's so much simpler on GNOME. and I just got used to it. But actually, I think I will probably depart from GNOME in the future because there are so many like delicious things to try. I have to try them. I see you're using Neri.
Mhm.
I tried to use Neri for a while as well, but not like intensely enough, so that it was too complicated, too cumbersome for me. And then but I want to revisit it
Mm.
and have a look at it closer.
There's a lot of stuff that I would like to play around with as well. People have been, I don't know if it's any good. People have been telling me about something called Mango WC. I need to take a proper look at it still, so I can't really comment on whether or not it's good, but there's so many really cool projects out there that some people actively use, others they don't, and you know, unless you try things that you've not experienced before, you're not really going to know what you actually like. A lot of people, they get very comfortable on the first thing they use, and it might be fine. That might be the greatest thing for you, but there's other things out there, and if you try other things, you might realize that I didn't actually like where I started. I just was comfortable because it's the first thing I used, and I used it so long that, you get used to the things you don't like about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, that's also when Bitwig introduced their touch interface, I was so interested to try this out, and I was still on macOS that I got myself a Surface device, a Microsoft Surface. I think, I don't know, was the first or second generation. And that was basically my first deep dive experience with Windows. And for as long as I can think, I always felt like Windows is so miserable. But then, in a way, I started to give it a chance, use it a little bit. And even though I still think it's miserable, but then some of the things started to be less miserable the longer I used them.
Hmm.
And even some of the things I felt, they actually should have something like that on macOS, like the window snapping or stuff like that. And yeah, I think you need to have time to, like, I installed Neri, I played around with it a little bit, and then I realized, this is going to take much more time than I have, and I discarded it again. But I am sure if I would invest more time in it, then there would be certainly aspects that I think, oh man, this is so amazing, and how could I live without this before, right? And then you have to weigh things in and then decide what to move forward with. But in Linux, it's crazy. You could try something every day, and
Hmm.
you would need to have a lot of time. But yeah,
So you mentioned you started with Manjaro.
yeah.
What brought you to that?
So actually, I read a lot about Linux, and like my understanding back then was just like, if you really know something about Linux, then you use Arch Linux. And I was already a little bit intimidated just from going to the Arch website. I felt like this is so nerdy, everything. Then I started to look into the Arch wiki, and I felt this is probably too much for me.
Sure,
So I
sure.
started to look for Arch-based distributions, right? And I don't know why, but I think back then I got the impression that Manjaro is not a corporation, it's a community project. It's Arch-based. It's intended to be a simple Arch experience.
Mhm,
And I felt like this is a good point to start. I found it extremely ugly, the green stuff. So the first thing I had to do is uninstall all the Manjaro specific stuff.
mhm, mhm,
But it was really good for me because I could, like for instance, the easy way that you can switch between kernels and stuff like that. I enjoyed to learn a lot about these things, and I always referred to the Arch wiki, and I never had any issues actually because I never used the AUR.
mhm, mhm,
I used it one and actually broke it. One time I wanted to have hardware acceleration again after it got removed.
mhm, mhm,
And then I took some package and actually ended up with a black screen after boot. But I just want to say, like, for me, it was a good soft entrance into Arch. Maybe it was not the best option. I think maybe there are better options to start with.
mhm,
But I still love the fact that I had to spend so much time with the Arch wiki and learn about stuff, and then actually also really understood what I did in the end.
mhm,
And when I finally installed Arch, I had 5 attempts. I screwed it up 5 times, but then when I installed it, I really felt like now I'm ready for Arch Linux.
mhm, mhm, mhm. So when you swapped to Arch, what was that experience like? Because a lot of people, they are very intimidated by it, and it sounded like to some extent you were. So, what did it feel like, sort of, just starting from basically nothing?
Hmm. I mean, I was in a special phase in my life. I just closed my company, and we were about to move to Thailand, and I had time. So for me, it was nice. I had like sometimes I had the laptop, sometimes I had the phone with the Arch Wiki, and I just basically followed the steps and learned about how to enable the Wi-Fi and all that stuff, you know. And I did so many things that I didn't even know that they happen behind the scenes. Like my keyboard needs to be actually defined; it's not automatically detected and stuff like that. So for me, it was really fun. But I think if I would not have had the time to do it, then maybe I would not have done it at all. Because I think when you like, let's say sometimes I do this. Sometimes I decide I need to reinstall my computer, and then I know I will have 2 days that I'm not productive. And I just make that decision and I go for it. But with Arch, I think it took me maybe a week or so to actually get it completed, like with learning and then messing up and learning again. And I also sometimes had the feeling now it's working, but I think I maybe screwed up some things. So let's start from scratch, you know? And yeah, I think because I had the time, it was amazing. Other ways, probably I would have, like the same with Neri. Otherwise, I would have probably said, "Oh man, this is too complicated. I go back to Manjaro."
Now we are recording again. Maybe Linux does have problems.
I mean, all computers have, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure what happened there, but yeah. Anyway, moving on from that. Where were we before we got sidetracked by whatever happened there?
The, the experience to install Arch, basically. No,
What a
I mean, for
perfect
me, it was
time
a
for that to happen.
yeah, absolutely. For me, it was great to go through this procedure. It's not that I remember all of it. I would need to consult the wiki again if I would do it again. But after felt like I went through it clean, I actually was proud and happy. And still, you know, the first couple of times updating, I felt like, oh, maybe this is dangerous. Because on Manjaro, what I always did is before updating, I would go and read in the forum. They have these release announcements, right? So I would read, and then people say, "Oh, I have this problem," and I already felt like this is going to be a dangerous update or it's going to be an easy update. But now, I don't know. I think it's also like an addiction. I run my computer. I start my computer. I run the updates, and of course, I read what is going to be updated. And in many cases, I don't really understand what these libraries do.
Right.
But if there is something that I really see, oh, I really depend on this, then I might go and look at the news and read a little bit about it before I update.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, like if it's, I'll do the same thing with OBS. Like if I see an OBS update come through, I'm like, okay, well, what are we actually changing here? Is this going to break a plugin? There's been times where they've done some big API rewrites, and then every single OBS plugin just stops working. I was like, let's not do
Yeah.
that one today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes, you know, like sometimes I do a change and I feel it's actually good. And then later on, I realize this little thing that I didn't notice before is actually because of that change. Like in one instance, for like I read the Pipewire description, like the article in the ArchWiki about Pipewire, and I saw that you can actually change the node names. So I don't have these cryptic, crazy interface names anymore. So they can have nice names. I thought, let's do that. I did it, and after a while, I realized that this actually causes always the audio engine in the DAW to just crash after a while. And I felt like this is the DAW's fault. But then it turned out that this was actually that change that I did. And so, yeah, now I'm a little bit cautious with stuff like that. And I think it's normal, no? Like sometimes you do an update and you don't initially realize that there's something different or something not working anymore. But usually I have to say it's crazy. I update all the time, and it feels like even the thought that not all the components individually get updated to me feels wrong. So for me, this rolling model is now just the normal state, and I never have problems actually. Not so far, at least.
Yeah, people look at Arch even Linux people look at Arch and are kind of intimidated in certain cases. Like, oh, things are updating all the time. That means things must be breaking all the time. And there's definitely cases where things will break. And the more things you have installed, obviously, the more likely that something can break 'cause you just have a higher surface area. But I'll maybe have one, like, real big problem a year, maybe. And even
Mhm.
then, it's not that big of a deal. And usually, by the time that I'm seeing it, because I usually wait a couple of days to do an update, someone's already talking about it. There's a forum
Yeah,
post or a Reddit post or something about it, or a news post about it, and I already know how to fix it.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, same, same. Yeah, usually everything works just fine, and if there's a problem, then you find help somewhere.
Mm, mm,
The most recent issue that I had that I don't fully understand is that on my laptop I have a MediaTek Wi-Fi card,
mm.
and after an update, the firmware was just gone. The folder with the firmware for this card was gone. I had no more Wi-Fi. And then I reverted the package, and actually, I think 2 or 3 updates later, it was still like that. And then the 4th update reintroduced it somehow. Maybe it's not that widely used, but yeah.
Mm.
I also didn't find too many people that had the same problem, but the firmware directory was just empty.
Um, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what would have happened there. Um,
But
maybe
it was
some.
easy enough to revert. So yeah. Was also good for me because I never did this before. I never reverted the package before. So it was actually nice to do it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever. I don't think I've ever had to do so either. Maybe I want something to break just so I can have something to talk about.
No, no. No, it's okay when it works.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Um, yeah, this is. It's nice to be able to use it as a learning experience, but when it's something you desperately need to function right now, yeah, that's definitely not pleasant.
Yeah. I think around Pipewire, for instance, something that I would really appreciate would be more flexible UI tools, because
Mm,
still I do a lot of the things in the terminal. Like for instance, to connect this microphone from the multi-input interface that it's connected to, I cannot do it in Helvum for whatever reason, so I have to
mm.
do it in the terminal. But I think that, and the ability to actually save setups, like save certain states and recall them, that would be amazing, you know?
Yeah, I've actually spoken with the Wire Plumber developer, and that is something that he's definitely interested in. Like, because right now I use QPW graph for doing everything. So
Mhm.
I like if I have my capture card for my console, I will route the audio from that to my speakers, or I'll take the audio from my mic and then route it into a jack client in OBS. And QPW graph remembers all that state, but there's no state that Pipewire or Wire Plumber holds. So there are you can run scripts, you can make tools to do it for you, but it would be nice if there was just a way to say, hey, link this node to this node, and then immediately upon starting Wire Plumber or whenever it sees those two nodes available, it just does it for you. That would make things really, really convenient.
Yeah, and Pipewire is much more powerful than people know, because, like for instance, on Linux, I said earlier that the class compliant interfaces have this 24 channel input limitation.
Mm,
But what you can do, which is actually really crazy, but it's, of course, it needs the implementation on the DAW side and the DAW side. Like Bitwig, for instance, you can have, like, let's say you have 4 different interfaces and each of them has 24 inputs. You can combine them as one interface, and it's actually Pipewire doing this. Pipewire integration in Bitwig allows you to do these combined interfaces. So you can actually pump up this limitation. And I don't know if you can do this on any other operating system that easily.
mm,
I can also have like a USB microphone, the webcam audio, the interface, everything combined in one interface, and just
mm,
use it and record stuff, vice versa. It's just amazing. I mean, and it's a little bit cumbersome in the sense that the UI tools are not that highly polished, but the capabilities are actually crazy.
mm. So, yeah, on that note, what is something you would like to see available that just isn't a thing yet?
Um, For the longest time, I wanted to have a really, really high-end audio editor, just where you can load audio files and edit them. I got used to use Audacity, and Audacity is like going to update soon, and I think it's gonna be probably amazing. But for the longest time, I was hoping for Acoustica from Aiken Digital to come to Linux, something like that, some really high-end audio editor. And I also hear that often that people, like you can do batch editing and stuff like that, batch conversion and things that nowadays I use FFmpeg and stuff like that. I got used to it. But if you come fresh to Linux, you would probably miss something like that. And I'm not sure if I would start to use it again, but for a long time, I really was missing something like that. And then I have a couple of plugin manufacturers like Sugar Bytes that I really want to come to Linux, and they are specifically the ones that say they would if they had the knowledge.
Right.
But other than that, I have to say, I'm happy. I can do what I need to do. And I recently realized this, that when I'm making music, I have no consciousness about being on Linux. I'm just making music. It's just amazing.
I think that's a good position to be in, where it's like the tool feels like it gets out of your way and just lets you do the work you want to do. I think this is probably part of the reason why people recommend Macs and why people use them, right? Because for a lot of people, it does feel like the tool gets out of their way. The difference with Linux is you've kind of got to do that initial setup first, and then once you've done that, then you're in that same position. But that initial setup, to some people, as I was saying earlier, can feel intimidating.
Yes, absolutely. But I also really don't know what could be the solution to this, because this is in one way a disadvantage, but also a very big advantage. So I don't know. I think people are not wrong when they say that users would adopt Linux if it would just come pre-installed on their laptop, because they usually just use what's on it. And I also, like sometimes when we have visitors here, I give them one of the laptops that has Linux on it. There's actually an Arch Linux laptop that has GNOME on it, but they never complain. They just use it. And I think if you would take out the complexity of having to remove Windows and install Linux or dual boot, like I never did it, right? But I often hear like, oh, it's so amazing, Linux, this and that. Oh, now fuck, Windows screwed up my dual boot setup. I never had to go through this experience, but I guess it's super frustrating. And I think all of this, if they would not have to go through this, they probably would just use it and would be happy with it.
Regarding the dual boot thing, I used to dual boot myself, but I never had dual booting set up in my bootloader. I would do the consistently working approach, but not exactly sensible approach of just swapping my boot drive in the in the UEFI in the BIOS.
Okay.
That always worked. Yeah. Nothing ever broke then. I didn't get a nice fancy interface that told me, oh, this is the Windows one, this is Linux, but I just knew what the drives were, and it always worked. So for anyone who wants to dual boot and never have any problems, that's probably the easiest way to handle it.
Yeah, I guess so. And that just reminds me of something, some things I really just gave up on. Like, for instance, I had this with Group, and then now I also have it with System Deboot, that on the 4K display, the boot menu is just tiny. And I tried like so many times. I said to myself, okay, now let's take an hour and fix this. But I never was able to fix it. Little things like that.
I don't know how to fix that. I have a 1080p display, and I just know that buying anything that is anything higher than that is gonna cause problems. So I just don't want to deal with it. Just for problems like that, and just regular window scaling problems, and every little problem that could possibly come along, I will let everybody else deal with it, and maybe in 10 years from now, when everything is hopefully resolved, then I'll deal with it.
Yeah. But, also, like, you do stuff like that. Like, for instance, I had to learn about EDIT, like EDID, because I bought a little monitor. My idea was I have this monitor when I record videos, and on this monitor I have OBS, so that I can check what I'm actually doing, because sometimes I would record for 2 hours and not realize that after 5 minutes OBS crashed. So I have this little monitor, And it's really amazing. Like when I record videos, I set the scaling to 150% only on the large screen so that people see something when I record. And as soon as I shut down this little monitor, magically everything goes back to how it was before that. So these little things where you realize like there's so much polish already in all of these things. Like I have 4K on one, like 1080p on the other display, different scaling factors, and when I shut down one of the monitors, everything goes back to normal how it was before. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing. I don't use mixed DPI or anything like that. So all of my displays are just fairly consistent. So I don't know. I assume that's like a fancy GNOME thing. Yeah, that's cool.
I guess it's probably GNOME, yeah. And yeah, are you using Wayland or X11?
Neri is on Wayland, so Wayland at this point.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I mean, I have lots of issues because of Wayland. For instance, yeah, like I wanted to have my mouse follow in OBS when I press a keyboard so that I can zoom in. But with Wayland and 2 monitors, you get crazy artifacts on the corners. It's only with Wayland, things like that. And so I just decided to not use these things. But yeah, that's a little bit the price you have to pay when you always use the latest thing, right? But I guess it's a GNOME issue, actually. I guess probably other desktop environments or window managers don't have that same problem.
I know there's Zoom issues on GNOME. My understanding is things are in a better state on KDE regarding that. But you did talk about wanting to try out other things. Like, what is GNOME maybe not doing for you, or what have you seen others have that like just looks interesting?
Well, to be honest, what I just don't like to have to use extensions. What I would like to use is just a system that does what I need. And to be honest, I don't like the visual appearance of Cosmic, but other than that, feature-wise, it would do exactly what I want. I would like to have the ability to have some workspaces where it auto-tiling and some workspaces where I can push around windows or like move them with some shortcuts. I am really compelled to try this. And also, I'm not sure if this is just a feeling thing, but I think GNOME also like carries a bunch of old baggage that maybe something new like Cosmic doesn't have. But I never tried it. I only watched videos so far. And Neri, I think, is just beautiful how the animations and everything and the workflow is. I'm not sure if it would translate to the 4K 32-inch display. But Neri, I would like to try. Hyperland, I tried, but it's just too complicated for me. I think it takes too much time to set up so that I really have what I need. And the reason why I chose GNOME or why I stick so long with GNOME also is because of the many little beautiful apps. I think the libadwaita ecosystem is really nice, although I don't like the whole issue with the theming and the whole like the tons of problems that come with these decisions that they make. So I have to see. I think I will probably not stick with GNOME in the future. That's my feeling at the moment. Yeah.
Well, regarding Cosmic, their first stable release is right now marked for December 11th. So if you want to try it out then, I don't know. From my experience doing the early testing, doing bug reporting for it, it's gotten a lot better. There's still a couple of issues here and there. Most of the crash issues are dealt with at this point. It's just a couple of things where, you know, the first version of anything is always going to be a little bit unpolished. There's going to be areas where, hey, there's a feature missing here that seems like it should be here. Hey, there's some weird design decision. These are just like natural things of a first release. And I'm sure once they've done the first one, it goes stable, they have more people testing it, then that's when you're going to have a lot of those things identified and ironed out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I realized that, for instance, I would like to have a system that has no window decorations. And that makes me realize that I would have to probably get rid of most of the apps that I'm used to use every day. And it feels like something that I want to do. But again, I probably would need some time, like when I installed Arch. No? And then I think I can make it happen. Maybe around Christmas. Who knows? Maybe I have some time to try it out.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I think it's always worth trying it out. And at the end of the day, I tell people, if you don't like it, you can always just go back to the thing you had before. You don't have to delete all of your settings and configuration and everything you were using. You can
Yeah.
just go back to it.
Yeah, my understanding is actually I could just install the Cosmic session and basically for a while use all the same apps that I use just with the Cosmic
Yeah.
window management, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I've not tried to install both GNOME and Cosmic alongside each other. I know there have been some issues with having KDE and Cosmic alongside, because KDE does. Remember how I was saying earlier about how, you have these big corporate projects where they do weird things because people don't look at the code? The same thing happens when you have a code base that's over 30 years, almost
Yeah.
30 years old. There's going to be some weird legacy design decisions from 25 years ago where nobody assumed you would be running, a second desktop alongside your main one, where a lot of those problems have been ironed out. I don't know of any major ones now, but there have been issues like that where KDE was saving files in a location that it probably
Mm.
shouldn't have been saving files in, and it was causing weird overwrites by doing the whatever it was doing. But yeah, this is just kind of like what naturally happens when you have a big project that's been around for a long time, right? There's always going to
Yeah.
be these areas where things could be improved, especially areas where
Yeah.
people maybe haven't touched it in over a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm also like, even though I know I could go back, I know from other experiences that usually I don't go back to backups. I usually then decide to, okay, you know what, let's clean install.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm kind of hesitant to try to run it both next to each other, even though I think in the Arch wiki it says that it should be possible with GNOME to have, but I'm not sure. I have to see.
Mhm. Yeah, that's that. You're on Arch, right? Like, you're on Arch, you can install whatever you want, so you might
Yeah,
as well try it out.
exactly.
So, going back to the initiative, where would you like to see things get to long term?
So long term, I think I need to learn more about how open source projects are management, and maybe I would like to maybe have someone to step in to help me with this, to make this initiative really open and actually have more people help to manage it, um, and also maybe to extend the website a little bit to integrate more features that I currently have only in the back. I do them manually.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's one thing. And then the other thing is really, I hope for a situation in the future where maybe some of the vendors will say that they will help, like maybe write articles, how to's. Because again, I even in the FAQ that I did, I had over the first couple of weeks, I had to change many things because they were plain out wrong. My assumptions were just wrong.
Mhm.
And so I would hope for more know-how to come in.
Mhm.
And I think on the vendor side and on the artist side, people who I think, it's again like what I said before when Apple drove the audio interface situation on Linux with their iPad, iPhone stuff.
Mhm.
I think right now so many people don't want to use a a US corporation based operating system that they are willing to try Linux. It's like like a totally a driver from an unexpected side that
Mhm.
I think this is going to increase anyways. So I don't think I have to do much there other than keep continuing asking people for support.
Mhm.
And I want to make more videos about it, want to show more. And also I have to take time because I know most about Bitwig, for instance,
Mhm.
and I also want to learn more about the pure FOSS alternatives because it drags me there. I want to go more in that direction, but I also have to invest time to make, for instance, an Ardour review and stuff like that. So yeah, the initiative, more help, more expertise, and the rest I think is already like running. Yeah.
Mhm. So, do you have a way right now that people can help you out, or is that kind of like you need to sort all that out?
I completely need to sort that out. I mean, I have everything in a Git repository, but like just one example, I asked someone for help and they said, yeah, I help, no problem. Give me access to the Git repository. And their feedback was like, oh man, this is so archaic. We have to change all of this. And so in turn, instead of helping me, it was actually like creating problems that were not there before.
Right.
And then the stack was so complicated that I couldn't get it to run on my system, etc., etc. And then it kind of like collapsed in itself. So I'm not saying that I'm not, I'm really willing to also remodel everything, but I also have to admit that I'm not like super knowledgeable in some of these areas.
Mhm.
Git, I know the basics, right? I can use it. I like, for instance, there is this other projects, Linux DAW.
Mhm.
It's a directory of plugins, and I contribute plugins there, for instance. So this is really cool. You have a little README on the website. They tell you what you need to do, and then you just basically make pull requests, add new plugins. I
Mhm.
can imagine that I find out, and again, I also need to have just a little time to figure this out, that I can imagine easy ways that people can help. Right now, I just have on my website an email template that people can copy and contact vendors about,
Mhm. Mhm.
telling them how great Linux is and that the adoption is growing, etc. But I need to figure out more ways how people actually can help, because right now everything is still just goes all through me, and I think in the future it's probably not going to work like that.
Mhm. So right now, the best thing that people can do is just reaching out to plugin developers on your behalf. Reach out, hey, I use Linux. Would you be interested in doing this? Just sort of showing that there is some interest in supporting these plugins. Because it's one thing for you to go and ask yourself, but if other people are also asking for this shows that there are more people than just you that want this to be done.
Exactly. And right now, what I do is in this email template that people can basically, because I also know that in many cases, like the vendors have questions and they
Mm-hmm.
have like doubts about things that could not work, and etc. So to take this weight away from people, the email template basically says, hey, support Linux, and if you need help, reach out to Amadeus. And that's also what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to help those people and to also try to answer some of the questions in the FAQ, make the FAQ smarter, maybe have like some guides in the future on how to do, like because many people also they buy specific computers to make Linux builds, and my understanding is that would not be necessary. You could also do that smarter, maybe have guides on that. Yeah, so I think yeah, there's many things to improve on in the future, but that's the best thing that people can do right now, is to basically go and ask for support. And also, again, as I said, not only plugins but also hardware.
Oh, we disconnected again, did we? Uh, hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Uh, hello, hello, hello. Hello. Um, uh, okay, just gonna reload because it looks like he's connected. Yeah, I'm gonna reload. No, still not there. Oh, and he's gone. I think what? Um, wait, he's alone in the call. Hello.
Strange. I don't know what happened.
I think you one of us DC'd and it didn't reconnect the call even though we're on the same call. I don't know. Um so I think the last thing you were saying was um something about hardware.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I said in the beginning, that I think I should maybe make the initiative a bit broader, no? Because I realized that there's software, like standalone software, that people would like to see on Linux that I also could target with it. And then, of course, the hardware things. So maybe I am going to modify it a little bit. It's not that well known yet, so that I can still do changes like that. And yeah, that's actually it. People can just reach out to whatever vendor they think should support Linux and point them to me, and I will try to help.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really interested to see sort of where this ends up going. And whilst this isn't a space that I personally am that invested in, I generally like there to be more support for things on Linux. Like that's just ultimately a good thing, because the more support there is for things like this, the more support there's going to be for other things that I am personally interested in, like the gaming space and like general computing peripherals, because as there's more people who are just generally using Linux, there's, more people using Linux, right? So it's just a bigger audience, and it's not like people who have one interest are only involved in that one interest. So there's generally going to be some sort of overlap and this sort of push to bring more and more things in line.
Exactly, yeah. That's also how I see it. I think there's many areas that could need better Linux support. And I personally am convinced that it will happen. But again, sometimes I'm a little bit over positive. So we will see. Yeah. But I think we all contribute to it by using it and being vocal about it. And like nowadays, like in the beginning, I would not have recommended anyone of my friends to use Linux. Nowadays, I tell them I can help you set up the computer, and then you're good to go. You can just do what you did before. It's not going to be a problem. So now I am pretty confident to also tell people start using it.
So there are these other projects and websites, like you're mentioning with Linux Door before. You talked about the Millisecond project. Have you tried reaching out to these various tools in the Linux space to, you know, I don't know, help each other out in various ways?
Actually, I have not done consciously so. That's actually a good point, to the Linux Musician Forum, to linuxaudio.org. Yeah, actually, I should do that. I haven't done so. Maybe also because I'm kind of shy, and like this thing is still very small. And I like in the beginning, I noticed that there's lots of things that need to be ironed out. But now I think it's actually in a good enough state to reach out to people. But still, I think I want to make it more open, because ultimately I would like to live in this world that I have in my head, this dream world where almost everything is open source. So right now I still like even my own initiative is not open source. So I think I need to do some homework there, but then I definitely want to reach out to all those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, because you'll generally have the same goal of, we want there to be better audio production on Linux. So it just logically makes sense to, I don't know, whether it be share resources or get other people involved in helping out. But I understand also wanting to just sort of get the project properly established as an open thing first, so you're not the one doing everything. Because I'm sure there are other people who would like to get involved and like to help out, who right now, kind of hard to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I need to think about ways how this can be done easily so that it's also fun to help
Mm.
to contribute, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think I have to do some homework first, and then this thing can grow. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm. So, is there anything that you feel like we haven't really touched on yet that we probably should bring up?
Um, no, actually not. I mean, again, there's many things that could be improved in the Linux environment in general,
Mm.
like make it easier, approachable to people. We talked about this already. But as for what I want to do with my initiative, I think we touched actually on everything. What I notice sometimes is that, and this is also something I'm not so sure about myself. Of course, I also like to use open source solutions if they're available, and I am not that consequent in that way so far.
Mm.
And sometimes I notice that there's certain people in the Linux movement who basically say we don't want more closed source stuff on Linux. So why are
Mhm.
you doing this initiative? Because most of these plugin vendors are like closed source now.
Mm, mm, mm.
So sometimes I think halfway of me thinks, yeah, but you're right actually. But then the other half also thinks, but it's also fun to try out all these things and to make Linux um, more attractive to all these people who
Mm,
are on
mm.
Windows and Mac OS right now. So yeah, I have some double speak in my head sometimes. I'm not sure if that's the right term to use, but there is like this side and that side, and sometimes I am easily a little bit intimidated if I'm on the right track.
Mhm.
But then again, I think this is all something that develops, and I will also go further and further into the open source direction. And maybe that's also, I ask all the vendors if they think that they could be open source. And many of them think, yeah, maybe this could work. And some of them are convinced that it would not work. But yeah, I think maybe even this could be influenced a little bit.
No, I understand what you're saying there. With there's always been this sort of mentality of we want Linux to always be the thing that it's always been, right? Like there's this tradition of open source and free software, and I understand why some people are kind of standoffish about anything encroaching on that space. It was kind of like this in many ways with like gaming when it was first coming to Linux through Steam, where there was this idea of no tucks, no bucks, where Proton came along, but there were still these people who didn't want to support any developers unless they provided a Linux native version of a game. And that's kind of faded out over time, but there's still kind of the embers of that around the place. And you'll see people say, "Oh, I don't want the Adobe suite on Linux because I don't want Adobe software on Linux." And that's basically the extent of the argument. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong.
Mhm.
I just I'm of the mindset that I would like more people to be using Linux, and if those people are moving towards an open source direction where now the majority of their system is open source, but they've got a couple of things here and there which just are not going to be, whether that be games, whether that be the door they use or the plugin they use, I think that's a better state to be in. I'm not the kind of person who says it has to be perfect or don't do it at all. I would like to move towards a positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like for me, I think probably it's normal for humans to just learn and never be 100% perfect.
Mm.
But for instance, I try to ride the bicycle as often as I can and not use the car. And still, there are people who tell me, your bicycle is actually not that much better. It's the aluminum is also something that comes from an invasive industry and stuff like. And I agree, yeah. But still, I try to do something good.
Mhm.
And also, if I want the world to change and not be like dominated by mega corporations, then it makes sense to me to go into the direction of open source and use another operating system. So I think it's little steps. And again, with my positive view on everything, I think this all has an effect. And maybe one day we will live in this Star Trek kind of world where everything is just amazing and settled.
Mhm.
Maybe not, but I think it's still worth to try to do the right thing. And even if it means like it's like only partially the right thing, right? So, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
And as long as we all have to earn money, I think there will be things that are not ideal because it's just
Mm.
this world, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is an interesting episode, and I hope people got something of value out of it. I'm sure there's gonna be at least a couple of even if they're not Linux musicians who are fully dedicated to it, at least people who are interested in trying it out. And I don't know, hopefully people learned something. And if there is a plugin that you want to have supported, be sure to reach out to whatever company it is that makes that plugin. And yeah, maybe things can be brought to a better state.
Great. Thank you very much again for doing this show with me. It really, I mean, I watch your videos all the time, and it was really kind of amazing to hear your voice, but actually realizing I'm not just listening, I'm actually in a dialogue. It's amazing. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. If people want to check out the initiative or check out anything else you do, where can they find it?
So just on linuxaudio.dev, basically, I think there's all the information there.
Mhm.
And I am active on Mastodon, so you can find me there also. And also the initiative is there. I post the updates there also. Yeah, and email. I'm very old school that way.
Fair enough. Do you want to mention any personal stuff you do that's outside the initiative?
Well, I mean, if people are interested to learn more about me, then they can also check out my website, AmadeusPaulussen.com. And I have a blog there where it's a little bit interweaved. Like the guides, for instance, are on my blog because they are more geared towards musicians. And the initiative is more geared toward the developer side. But yeah, if they're interested to dive deeper, then they can also check out my personal website.
Okay. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you on. If you want to come and do another one in the future, hey, hopefully, some positive progress has been made, and yeah. So, nothing else to mention. That's pretty much it.
That's it. Thanks again, and see you soon.
Okay, I'll do my outro, and then we'll sign off. So, my main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Sometimes I stream as well. The Cosmic Stable release is coming up soon, so there'll definitely be a stream for that one. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. Right now I'm playing through Yakuza 6 and Silksong. And if you're watching the video version of this, you can find the audio version on basically every podcast platform at Tech Over Tea. And the video is on YouTube, Tech Over Tea as well. I'll give you the final word. How do you want to sign us off?
Linux all things.
Perfect.
Okie dokie.